something amazing is happening in Europe. You are actually hearing politicians in the European Parliament in Brussels chanting, "Send them back, send them back." And that is exactly what is now the law of the continent. The same chamber that spent 30 years calling patriots racist. The same chamber that fined Hungary and Poland millions of euros in fines for protecting their borders. The same chamber that told the citizens of Europe, your cultures, your laws, your neighborhoods, they didn't matter as much as open borders and managed migration. That chamber just erupted into chants of "send them back." Stick them to the very end of this video because we're going to see exactly the law that was just passed overwhelmingly by the European Parliament, why it reflects a growing backlash against Europe's growing Muslim population, and what it means for the future of the West and beyond. You are not going to want to miss this. Hey gang, it's me, Dr. Steve, your patron professor, here to help you make sense of the madness with breaking news and analysis you're not going to get anywhere else. So you know what to do. Make sure to smack that bell and subscribe button. On Wednesday, June 17th, the European Parliament voted 418 to 218 to officially pass what's called the Return Regulation. It's the strictest, most aggressive, most comprehensive deportation enforcement framework the European Union has ever adopted. The political coalition that made it happen was the same bloc that we saw forming back in March in their preliminary vote. The center-right EPP, the European People's Party, and then a number of nationalist populist wings that have been growing by leaps and bounds. So you've got the European Conservatives and Reformists, you've got the Patriots for Europe movement, and you've got the Europe of Sovereign Nations group. They voted all together as a unified bloc, and as you saw, they crushed it. Remember, if you don't know, the frustrating part here is that the center-right EPP, the European People's Party, up until now, they've consistently sought to marginalize the nationalist populist right. So they're the biggest bloc in the European Parliament, the EPP, the center-right EPP, but they're establishment right. They're kind of like Europe's version of the rhinos, the neocons. So they often vote with the center-left so as to keep the so-called far-right out of power. Those days are now increasingly over as the continent moves more and more to the right, as so-called far-right parties siphon off more and more voters from the center-right, like we've seen in Germany of late with the rise of the AfD, or in France, or in Italy, or Austria, Netherlands, or Sweden. It's forcing the center-right across the continent to have to align itself more and more with the nationalist populist right. And that's exactly what we just saw in the European Parliament. And lo and behold, when the center-right aligns with the nationalist populist right, they are massive. Their coalition is literally unbeatable. Again, this return regulation bill passed 418 to 218. And it didn't just pass, it passed with celebrations of "send them back," which absolutely flipped out what's left of the leftists in the chamber.
Okay, we move to the next item on the agenda, the report by Mrs. Brigmont on the EU-Pakistan Agreement modification of concessions on tariff freight quotes. Vote on consent by roll call vote. The vote is open. The vote is closed. We move to the... It's adopted.
Well, you can chant "shame on you, shame on" all you want, but that supposed shame is now the law of the land. The new law does four things. First, migrants issued a return order are legally required to cooperate with their own deportation. They've got 30 days to comply. No more gaming the system indefinitely. No more endless procedural delays. You get the order, you comply, period. We'll talk about that in a second. Secondly, it institutes extended detention. Under the old rules, migrants awaiting removal could only be held for 6 months. Under this new law, it's 24 months, 2 years, with the possibility of a 6-month extension. Those deemed security threats can actually be placed in enhanced security facilities while the removal is processed. This is a quadrupling of detention authority. Third, and this is the one that's making the globalist left absolutely lose their minds, offshore return hubs. EU member states can now negotiate individually or in coalitions to establish deportation centers in third countries outside EU borders entirely, where rejected asylum seekers are processed and held until they're finally removed. It's the EU's version of Trump's Remain in Mexico policy. Italy's Giorgia Meloni, to her credit, she pioneered this exact model through her Albania protocol. And now the same Brussels that called that approach barbaric has made it standard EU policy for all 27 member states. Fourth, a lifetime ban from the European Union for anyone deported as a security risk. Not a temporary restriction, not a 5-year bar, permanent. If you are deported as a threat to European civilization, you are never coming back. Now, you need to understand why this moment is so historically significant. Because to understand the magnitude of what just happened, you got to understand how catastrophically the old system had failed. For decades, the EU operated on a policy of what can only be called managed civilizational surrender. When a migrant arrived illegally, received a deportation order, and refused to comply, almost nothing happened. And the hard data is irrefutable. Only about 20% of migrants who received a return decision are actually returned. You heard that right, 20%. 80% of migrants who were ordered out of the continent stayed. 8 out of every 10 deportation orders were simply ignored across all 27 member nations. And as a result, European citizens watched their cities and their countries demographically transform like literally never before. At the turn of last century, there were approximately 10 million Muslims in the entire continent. Today, that number has surged upwards of 50 million. As a result, Europeans have watched their neighborhoods change dramatically. They watch their daughters afraid to walk home at night. They watch the church spires of centuries-old Christian civilization overshadowed by the creeping architecture of a fundamentally different civilization. And when they spoke up, when they voted for parties that promised enforcement, Brussels called them far-right Nazi extremists. Not anymore. Patriots are rising up and taking their continent back, and it's changing even Brussels itself. Wait until you see this. But first, let me ask you a question. What do you think you could do if you had the same insider trading information that Nancy Pelosi has, right? You know exactly what I'm talking about. Politicians like Pelosi have had access to insider trading secrets for decades now. They know exactly what stocks to buy, when to buy them. But guess what? You and I, we actually have access to that very same inside information. I kid you not. Thanks to a little-known SEC database, we can see what and when corporate CEOs are buying up in real time, and then we get to piggyback on their trades to gain the same advantage for ourselves. Gang, that's why you have got to click on the link below and sign up for a free training with me and my good friend Ross Givens. It's this Thursday, June 25th, 3 p.m. Eastern. Ross is an insider trading expert whose recommendations have led to investment returns of over 200%. Some have hit as high as nearly 1,500%. It's going to be an amazing free training where you and I can learn how to trade with the exact same insider knowledge as these politicians, but we're going to do it legally and ethically. But don't wait. Seating registration is limited, so click on that link below right now. Register today, and I'll see you for an event that promises to change your life. What we're seeing rise throughout Europe is what scholars call civilizational populism. Now, the key here is that this goes way beyond simply rising nationalism or nationalist sentiments. More and more Europeans are not just demanding the restoration of national sovereignty, they're demanding the restoration of their civilizational sovereignty. It's not a conflict of nation versus nation. More and more Europeans see the great conflict of the 21st century as civilization against the forces that would dissolve their civilization. The same forces that erased borders, silenced dissent, criminalized tradition, and rewarded demographic replacement with the label of progress. In Italy, their ruling party, the Brothers of Italy, have introduced sweeping legislation to ban the burqa and the niqab in every public space across their country. Schools, shops, offices, and streets. Under Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni's nationalist populist government, Italy has slashed migrant arrivals to their nation by nearly half through aggressive deals with North African countries. They've detained asylum seekers for up to 2 years while processing claims. They've weakened immigration policies, and they've deported imams for comments made at political rallies. Geert Wilders, the Netherlands, managed to get the more extreme Islamic political organization, the Muslim Brotherhood, banned from their nation. In Germany, their center-right chancellor, Friedrich Merz, he's just announced that upwards of 800,000 Syrian refugees are going to be repatriated. They're going to be sent back in the next 3 to 4 years. I mean, we could go on and on. And now what we're witnessing in Brussels is we're actually hearing the chants of send them back on the floor of the European Parliament, the very parliament that spent the last 30 years labeling that very law, the law they just passed, as xenophobic and racist. You cannot make this stuff up. The overturned window hasn't just shifted, it's been demolished. The very chamber that once punished nations for defending their borders against what they believe to be an alien civilization has now voted to codify into EU-wide law what Viktor Orban of Hungary had been saying since 2014. What Giorgia Meloni has been saying since 2018. What Marine Le Pen has been saying for 20 years. They were all called fascists. They were all called xenophobes. They were all told that they were on the wrong side of history. Well, history disagrees. And the globalist left, they're in full meltdown. The UN High Commissioner for Human Rights issued a statement saying that he deeply regretted the regulation's adoption. Socialist members of the European Parliament called the session disgraceful. The Green Left Alliance, what's left of them, called the celebration of the vote horrifying. But here's what's really horrifying. What's horrifying is that it took this long. What's horrifying is that for 30 years, ordinary European citizens were told that borders were bigotry. What's horrifying is that an entire generation of European children grew up in a continent whose governing class actively worked to dissolve the civilizational inheritance those children were meant to receive. That is what's horrifying. And the people of Europe have finally and thankfully had enough. You know what I love most? When you push back, when you bring your toughest questions, when you refuse to just nod along. That is exactly what the Monday night Q&A inside the Courageous Patriot Club is for. Every week, patriots just like you bring their hardest questions about what is happening in the news, the culture, the church, the country, and I answer them directly. That's why I want you to click the link below to join me and thousands of patriots just like you. Ask your questions. Be part of the conversation. That is what this movement is built on.